Okay. So just make a note that you're still alive. The taking something for granted is where it's sort of it's there as an assumption, you know. So one of the deepest assumptions, misconceptions that we have, these misconceptions Buddha says that we're all believing in, which causes so much problems, is this one of being permanent, or at least not impermanent. And so a really marvellous way, which we'll talk about today, to really wake ourselves up to this reality, you know, is to think about, to look at the impermanence of, the gross impermanence of one's own death. So just note, I'm still alive. Amazing, you know. There are causes for my life. You know, as far as Buddha's concerned, you're not coming from a superior being. You don't come from your parents. And you're not some random event, you know. There are causes, and the causes are in your own mind. And the causes for a life are morality. The non-harming of others, the actively benefiting others, is what accumulates the imprints of morality, which causes life to last. So how come your breath hasn't run out yet? It's because you've still got some morality in your gas tank, in your petrol tank. So whether that or not, if you like, but nevertheless, the fact is, yes, I'm still alive. So great, may I make the most of it. I'm here at this course to think about Buddhism, listen to what the Buddha has to say about life, reality, happiness, suffering, blah, 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 you know. To think about it, to see if there's something applicable to me. If there's not, that's cool, you're the boss. But here, you know, thinking, may I make the most of today? Come to the classes, listen, think about it, do the discussion, like that. Why? So I can see if there's some tools there I can take to help me develop my amazing potential all the way to perfection, as far as the Buddha is concerned. And why even that? So I can help others do the same thing, because we're all in the same boat. Sangye charan sokye chognam la jancho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drobpa shog. Sangye charan sokye chognam la jancho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drobpa shog. Sangye chadang soke chognam la jancho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drobpasho. So far we have talked about, in the context mainly of this little package called the Four Noble Truths, just very briefly. The third one, this whole view of the Buddha, that we have the potential to be free of suffering, to be full of happiness, joy, wisdom, all the positive qualities. Buddha is saying our mind is innately pure, which doesn't mean it was pure once and we lost the plot, like Adam and Eve, not like that. But the fundamental point, and we gradually going more into this, try to show the truth of it, try to show the logic of it, that this mind of ours, this non-physical continuity, beginningless continuity of mental moments that doesn't come from anyone else, that isn't the brain, that it is in its nature clear, that's its nature, but that it's polluted, and the pollution is not at the core of its being. And so in a simple way we could say, using that analogy of water, the H2O of our mind is the positive qualities. Just to hear that doesn't make much sense to us, because truly the view we have, and I want to talk about this too, this view, the way we view ourselves, the view we have of ourselves is that we are made up of, the pollution and the pure stuff. This is the view we have. This is the view of all the contemporary models of the mind. We take this as a given. We don't question it. Well, then this is what we're doing here is questioning that view. Buddha's view is that the positive qualities, but try to not just believe it, let's see some logic in this, are in the core of our being, are the H2O of the mind. And the negative ones aren't, and therefore are additives, and therefore can be removed, which is the fundamental basis of all of Buddha's entire path, that this potential. This is the meaning of nirvana. It's not some place like heaven. It's a name, really loosely speaking, okay? It's a name, it's a word used to refer to the state of a person who has rid the mind of the pollution. It literally means cessation. Suffering and its causes have been ceased, have been finished. We've talked about that. We've talked about the beginninglessness. We've talked about, then we introduced the second noble truth. We've touched on the first, the levels of suffering. Haven't begun to really go into the second one, which I want to do more by talking about the delusions, but the second type of suffering and the first noble truth. But then in the second noble truth is where the causes of suffering. And the big shock here is there are many, many, many causes and conditions, as we know, that come together to produce something like a cup or a moment of suffering, but that we all believe that the person out there, the event out there, the thing out there, God out there, the parents out there are the cause of me, this, that, suffering, happiness. Buddha would say this is a faulty philosophy. He's not being moralistic about it and saying you're bad to think it. He's simply saying you're incorrect. Wrong recipe, dear. You won't get the cake. So his view is there are many, many causes and conditions that have to come together. This is reasonable. Everything, we know that. There's no one cause of anything. Then if you didn't know anything about botany, you'd have to probably give me a catalogue of 500 pages just to explain to me all the things that I need to be able to make a flower. There are many, many things that have to come together, many causes. So the same for a person, but the same for suffering, the same for happiness. But the two main causes, this is the point. And why he mentions the two main causes, because they're the ones, if we change, we quit the suffering. And they are both in myself, which is a little bit of a shock. Karma, past action, that sows the seed in the mind, that we don't pull out from the mind, we don't purify, that stays there, and then eventually when it meets the appropriate conditions, such as this person in front of me, Jason, and then the punch comes. And then the second cause of the suffering, which really is the first one, the main one, the two subsumed down to the delusions. This is what even causes us to act, to create karma. And then the delusions in the case of responding to the punch because I believe I'm an innocent victim and it's not fair, and who do I think he is, and I didn't ask to get born, it's not my fault, poor me, victim, I punch him back. So another seed, and keep repeating and circling in this kind of repetition of misconceptions that keep deepening my suffering. This is how Buddha puts it. So it's quite an interesting view. You've got to admit, you like it or not, it's an interesting view. So we've talked about all that, pretty much. So if we look at this other package, which I did mention briefly, which is mentioned in your notes, this Tibetan word lam rim. The first word lam means path, the second gradual or graded. So like I said, it's kind of a cute, a sweet phrase that we use in English, that we would say in English, the word course. It's a very nice word. You've got to do a course in English. You've got to do a course in music. And we know a course is a nicely, orderly, structured way to learn something, from the simplest to the most advanced. How marvellous, how practical. This is how we learn everything. We're very familiar with this, aren't we? Anything you have to learn. Someone won't chuck you a whole pile of books of Mozart and complicated and simple, and then you've got to sort it out yourself. It's really brilliant how we've learned things over the centuries, Especially in this contemporary world, we're very clever intellectually. All these nice little packages to learn the most complicated thing or to learn the most simple. You start at the beginning, you do grade 1, grade 2, and then you graduate. That's how we learn everything. Now, what's fascinating is when we think about a spiritual path, we lose the plot. Course? How ridiculous, how mundane. Spiritual is all mystical and a beyond and above, and it's all mystery and who knows anyway, and what do you mean orderly, It's a very big surprise to us to think like this. But this is in particular the Tibetans. It's this person called Atisha, one of these great Indian masters back in the 11th century, was invited to Tibet by the king. Buddhism had been there about 300 years already, coming from India. They'd created their language, especially for their philosophy, Buddhism, based on Sanskrit. And by this time, this Atisha came. He was this great scholar, this master, this whatever you want to call. And he came and he saw that Buddhism was, flourishing in Tibet, but it was it was a bit confusing. All the great, esoteric people over here practicing Tantra and all the ones over here practicing the basic stuff. And it was not really a coherent, cohesive packaging of it all. So he wrote this simple little book text called Lamp for the Path, the light to guide you on this path. And basically all he did was he took the essential points of all of Buddhist philosophy from A to Z and presented it in a really orderly, psychologically progressive way in this package called Lamrim, divided into 3 sections. And again, the terms they use are not how we speak, let's say, in English. The first section of it for the beginning stages of practice, they call them the practices of the lower scope. Then there's the middle scope, and then the great scope. So you've got to analyze those words to understand the meaning. It means simply the capacity or scope of the student, So I like to call it junior school, high school, university, and then you've got postgraduate. It's the simplest way to show it, and it's truly like this. The first stages of practice, like I've mentioned already, basically you back off, zip your lip, keep your hands to yourself, and be a nice person. And you go by the 10 things. You don't do this, and you don't do this, and you don't do this. A bunch of 10 don'ts. And don'ts are handy. Don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, don't this, don't that. Why? Because they're actions that other people don't like, because it hurts them. But why? Because they are the negative actions that come from the negative place. They're motivated because that's been the history of those actions. They're the actions of ego. They come, if you analyze them, they come from I. They come from what I want. They come from attachment. They come from anger. They come from ignorance. Their motivation is this. So they're the things that pollute my mind and cause me suffering now and in the future. And so on the most fundamental, basic, idea at this first stage, which one needs to cultivate, is, hey, I don't want more suffering. So this is, again, remember the point. If I'm a good Catholic, I will obey the 10 things because God said. But as a Buddhist, not because Buddha said. That's ridiculous. I have to think about it and see that he is saying it. From his own experience, he is suggesting these are the things that would be best to avoid because they're going to cause you suffering. One has to at least think about that and take that on board, Okay, that seems reasonable. So then you try to be a nice person. Don't do the don'ts. Good enough. If the whole world did this, it'd be a very nice world. At least we wouldn't harm each other. Control behavior, just like your grandmother told you. Be nice. Behave nicely, Pretty reasonable. But the basis for the Buddhist one is this, that it's going to cause you suffering. So already it demands some sense of self-respect. Not just guilty, I shouldn't do because someone said, like we all do, like little petulant children, We've got to think about it. And for one's own sake. Already very mature, or very, very grown up, taking responsibility. But before, but that's the general, the whole of the first scope of little things to think about. Because basically this whole packaging of those teachings, the way one meditates upon them is to think about them. This is what we're doing in here. There's a certain approach. One analyzes, one thinks about. So before we even go into this, let's look at this word meditation and a little bit into the whole business of meditation and what it means. Because everybody in this room will have a different definition of the word. It's a very common word. Many spiritual traditions have it. Many people do things called meditation. But let's look at the Buddha's deal. Because as usual, it's got a very specific meaning. So the word in Tibetan, actually, I mentioned this, for the verb to meditate in English is the verb to familiarize. To familiarize, to become familiar with. So obviously the question is with what? Well, 2 things. With that which is real, that which is true, and that which is positive. So if you think about it in the most simple sense, it makes sense that at the moment, Buddha's saying, we're completely familiar with samsara. We've practiced it for countless lives to perfection. Attachment, anger, jealousy, fear, depression, run the show. They're the things that cause the problems. Okay, being human, aren't we lucky we have a bit of kindness, love, compassion, wisdom, and everything else? And that's the stuff we're trying to develop. But you know, the other stuff is pretty instinctive. In this room right now, we can be quite reasonably friendly, but if some mad, crazy guy starts coming in with a gun, just watch your mind. Go berserk, freak out, get angry, get upset, or even just look if someone looks mean at you. The ego comes, you know, who does she think she is? What does she mean? Poor me. The drama starts. It doesn't take much to trigger the samsaric stuff, does it? Every one of us knows this. So that indicates that stuff, we are very familiar with it. Why? Not because of our mummy's genes, but because we've done it before. So we've practiced it pretty well. We've really meditated on anger and love and anger and attachment and jealousy and pride and ego and all the rest. Our minds are very familiar with that stuff. Not too difficult to prove, just by looking at yourself. We fall into those ones pretty easily. Just like if you go to the piano and your hands fall into it really easily and you play it beautifully, we can deduce you've done it really well before because now it's instinctive. Same with anger, depression, fear. So if someone punches you in the nose and you immediately forgive them and love them, this proves you are familiar with forgiveness and love, doesn't it? But we have to struggle to forgive them and love them. That proves that's less practiced within us. It's not trying to be moralistic. If we observe our behavior, we can deduce these things. So, we at the moment are familiar with samsara. Buddha says we come fully programmed from the first second of conception. This new person with new instincts, new impressions, from new tendencies, you know, coming from before. And then we begin to express them as we grow up, you know. So what we're trying to do is familiarize our mind with the positive qualities. And it also happens to be, like I mentioned yesterday or the day before, that this very interesting take on things in Buddha's view of the universe, that the happiness and reality have a very intimate relationship. In fact, as I said, the method for getting happiness is to be in touch with truth. And at the moment, these non-virtuous states of mind, the negative states of mind, the neurotic states of mind, the deluded states of mind, the disturbing emotions, they are suffering and they're fantasies. So being delusional and being miserable come hand in hand. Being happy and being in sync with reality come hand in hand. This, I think, is totally tasty. So our job is to familiarize our mind with that which is real and that which is positive. That is the meaning, the purpose of meditation for the Buddha. So there are thousands of techniques, and you can create new ones every day. But there are two fundamental approaches, two basic ways of using one's mind. In meditation. The first one, and it is usually known as this sweet English phrase, calm abiding. The mind abiding calmly. It's very sweet, actually. And that is, so that the type of meditation is known in terms of its goal. It's labeled in terms of its goal. Calm abiding is the goal of this type of meditation. You can call it concentration meditation. You can call it the goal single-pointed concentration. You hear the word samadhi. This can be used kind of synonymously here for the goal. So even this is, as I'm saying, not kidding, is a pretty radical idea. But because conveniently in the world we put it into the little pot called religion, then we lose any common sense when we talk about it. When we think we're doing this kind of meditation, we never think, well, this is a psychological technique. How come my therapist didn't teach me? Because we don't think of it as psychology. We think of it as religion, the spirit, the something else, you know. It's not just, the Buddhist view is just, there's no such thing. It's psychology. Buddha didn't use the word psychology. Excuse me, he didn't speak Greek. He spoke Hindi or something. It's just a Greek word, you know, for mind. Well, Buddha talks about mind. That's it. But he happens, as I've been saying, to have this view, which is coming from the Hindus anyway. You know, he took it from them. They don't care. They're happy to share. But this approach to developing the mind to these very subtle levels. And that's the major difference between the Buddhist view, the Hindu view, and the materialist view. The vastest, majorest, hugest difference. That the mind has this phenomenal capacity to go to extremely subtle, refined levels of cognition. Because that's its job, to cognize. So like I said, that conference, the Mind and Life conference in 2003, the Dalai Lama participated in, you know, the findings of the two different groups is a really telling point. 6 seconds was what the materialists, the scientists said that you could possibly achieve for concentration. And then the Buddhists are saying many months at a time. So there's kind of a difference there, and because the assumptions of what mind is are completely different. So obviously here we're talking about the Buddhist view of mind. This not physical, you know, this non-physical continuity, thoughts, feelings, emotions, unconscious, subconscious, etc. So in the esoteric teachings of Buddhism, which are really prevalent in Tibet, which is known as Tantra, and that's like postgraduate, if you like, in terms of the Lam Rim, that's your postgraduate. There's a very nice little model to describe the way the mind is. And this is used also, Tibetan medicine is based upon this model, you know. So they talk about how we have gross consciousness, subtle consciousness, very subtle consciousness. Just levels of capacity of cognition, really. So, and then along with each of these comes a level of physicality. So obviously at the gross level of gross consciousness, which is really the conceptual and the sensory, this is obviously what goes along with this body. The gross consciousness and the gross body. They're intimately, inextricably linked. You can't have concepts, you know, if you don't have all the working brain and the working nervous system. You can't have an eye consciousness, having a visual consciousness, if you don't have an eyeball. So the capacity to cognize visually is consciousness, which is not physical, but it's dependent upon an eyeball. They're two separate phenomena. Consciousness and eyeball are different. One is mind, one is matter, but they are intimately connected. You can't have one without the other. Well, you can have an eyeball, but it won't function without consciousness. When it's a dead eyeball, it doesn't do anything. So then you've got subtle consciousness, and that too is inextricably linked with a certain level of physicality. So the way they talk in Tibetan medical system, this is also you hear it in yoga, it's in the tantric system. You have the subtle, the kundalini, the red and white drops. You have the subtle nervous system. They talk about 72,000 subtle channels. You have the subtle wind or the prana that courses through those channels. And this is in great detail described in Buddhist Tantra. And it's a major part of, and harnessing all this energy is what the great yogis and meditators are learning to do. So very subtle consciousness comes along with this. So we virtually never access that. We might sort of, the way I like to say it is we sort of maybe touch the outer edges of it. When we have, you know, when we're not so grossly caught up in self, we have some sensitivity to others, don't we? We can notice what people are feeling. We can be aware of certain things. We can even have little moments of really knowing something's happening or going to happen. We can have little moments of sort of clairvoyance. Everybody has this, you know, some insight into something. If you like, that's just sort of just beginning to touch on the grosser outer edges of one's subtle consciousness. The only time we ever do experience it properly, and we don't even do it properly then, is when we dream. That's subtle consciousness. That's, you know, we can see it's a weirdo, strange experience, and it's not really properly, you know, it's not really described well in any of the modern psychological models, because there's not much understanding about it, because it doesn't really, the brain is often not working then. Well, this is the way, when the mind gets very subtle, there's no brain activity at all. But the subtle consciousness even, for the Buddhist view, and this is from experiences, and you know, this is what they say, it doesn't need a body to function. This is how come people can have out-of-body experiences. This is how come when people dream they can fly or go places. I remember a course here 15, 20 years ago, some bloke from Brazil, Every night, he'd come to the class in the morning, he'd be tired, because all night he'd been travelling around the world, visiting the people in Africa and visiting his girlfriend in a room. He'd tell them, you know, he had this capacity to leave his body. Obviously from some past meditation experiences, but he didn't know what to do with it. He was going crazy with it. He thought he was some special holy person. But he's off his brain, you know. Well, he was all right. It was interesting. But he was, you know, was tired all night. He was bopping around the world. He was able to leave his body at will. Well, when you're really capable, you can do this. But you know how to do it. You know how to achieve the goal. You know how to get to do that. You know, you can train. And that's by doing single point of concentration. Achieving samadhi, achieving calm abiding. Just that. So subtle consciousness, we have it, but we don't access it. You know, we're fully conscious from the moment we wake up until we go to sleep, and that's our conceptual and our sensory level of cognition, which, as we can see, is a very, very gross level of cognition. But because it's all we know, we take it for granted. The fact that we can't remember most of today, and it's 9:29 according to my clock. We can't remember most of today. If each of us had to account for everything we thought and done since we got up, we'd be a miserable failure. Would you not think so? We can't remember because we're spacing out most of the time. We're living in la-la land in our heads. We're worried and fearful and confused. We're caught up in our own ego most of the time. Therefore, we're not aware of what the hell is going on. So we can't remember most of today, and it's only a few hours we've been up. So forget about remembering yesterday. Forget about remembering when you're a little girl. And forget about remembering a past life. What a joke. Because why? Very simple. The gross level of consciousness isn't capable. That's all. It's not capable. That's why the Western models of the mind can't factor in things like reincarnation and all these weird experiences. Because if you keep insisting it's the brain, you're up against a brick wall. You can't go anywhere with this. You can't. Until you start hypothesizing that maybe the mind isn't the brain and it's possible that these Hindus and these Buddhists and these other people are onto something, until you start thinking this, you can't go anywhere with all these experiences. They're just weird and wacko, you know. The third level of the mind is called very subtle consciousness. We virtually never access this. It occurs every time we die, every time we sleep, every time we faint. And they say whenever you have sexual orgasm, it occurs then. But it's not something we can access and utilize. So these meditation techniques, the single point of concentration, these calm abiding techniques that have been around for thousands of years, you know, they enable us to access a more subtle level of consciousness. It's in the tantric types of meditations, they are more powerful, more potent, and in those, the greatest of the greatest meditators are able to access the very subtle level of consciousness. So why would you want to do this? Not just to be some kind of trippy person. There's a very logical reason. To finally unpack the misconceptions and to see reality. Because only the very subtle level of consciousness has that capacity. It happens to bring, even achieving even small levels in the process of developing calm abiding, phenomenal experiences can be experienced. You know, but they're just like the byproducts. They're not the purpose of meditation. You know, so one of the biggest misconceptions, I think, I don't know what misconceptions, we've got so many, I think, in the West, about meditation. One of the commonest ones is you're supposed to feel good. Well, it's good to feel good, but it's less work. To go get an ice cream, it's a lot easier work than sitting to meditate to feel good, okay? Go lie down, go have some sex. So it's not the purpose. The purpose of, so the single point of concentration, meditation, it's, the idea of it, again, is quite simple, like all these things. They're just difficult because we don't know how to do them, that's all, because we're not familiar with them. So what you're trying to do in the first mode of meditation, called single point of concentration. Okay, I'll talk about the second one in a minute. No, I'll mention it here, and then we'll describe. So the second type of meditation, which is the point, is even the reason you do the first one, is it's known generally, again, as its result, in terms of its result, insight, or sometimes they refer to it in this tradition as special insight. Insight. It's a very nice word in English. I think, again, I know when I'm in France or Spain, there's not a word that's exactly this one. But the word insight is very nice. Insight, seeing in, internal seeing. It's very good. Nice word. So let's bring these two things way down to earth, out of the mystical sky, okay? Okay, I'll talk about insight in a minute. Go back to this other one, calm abiding. So what concentration, okay, why are you doing concentration meditation? What is the reason? It is to steady the mind, to focus the mind. Why? So that it can effectively do the insight mode of meditation. And in this particular approach, the method to get insight is called analysis. Or they call it in Tibetan analytical meditation. Well, that's a fancy word for to think about. Okay? Don't fantasize it. Analytical meditation means think about something. Guess what? Nothing special. But the more you've accomplished in the calm abiding, the more refined and focused your mind, the more brilliant, the more excellent can be your analysis. This is a particular approach to getting insight. Okay? But if we look at our ordinary life, we can see we are completely familiar with these two modes of meditation. We just don't call them this. So when I'm a little girl and I go to school and my teacher teaches me that 1 and 1 is 2. And then she says, go home and do your homework, Robina. What she's saying is, go home, Robina, do a little bit of concentration meditation and then do your analytical meditation, please, and get an insight. That's all she's saying. What does she mean? Well, I've got to go home. First of all, if I don't have any concentration, it's obvious I can't think about it, can I? By the time I've said 1, I've already lost the plot. By the time I've said plus, I've forgotten what I'm doing. So it's obvious to accomplish the most simple task, you've got to keep your mind on the ball, which is called concentration. It's very simple, at whatever level. So I have to sit there with my little pencil and my little piece of paper and at least attempt to be focused. And then I've got to think it through, don't I? I've got to work it out. But first, what are the components of my thinking? I have to know the meaning of 1. I have to know the meaning of plus. I have to know the meaning of equals. And I have to know the meaning of 2. They're the pieces that I have to then put together to trigger an insight. So I think about it, don't I? I work it out. I might have to use blocks. I might use my pencil. But at some point I'll go, oh, I get it. That's an insight, people. That's all. An insight is when the penny drops. An insight is when you get something, not just in your head, but it triggers, it goes down to your heart. You've got the words first, 1 + 1 = 2. And I've memorized it, I can even tell my friend. But what does it mean? I'm not sure yet. So I have to think about it. Then I get the real meaning. It becomes my own experience. That is what we are doing every single day with everything we have ever learned. Isn't it? Makes sense. Nothing special. This is concentration and special insight. Insight. Analytical meditation. We do it all the time. It's just we don't call it these words, Therefore we mystify it. It's like ridiculous. We're familiar with it. So what are we trying to get insight into here? Into karma, continuity of consciousness, clarity of mind, impermanence, emptiness, compassion, all these things. All the points that Atisha has laid out in this little graduated path, in this little course to enlightenment. So one takes each of those points, having listened to them. I can't do analytical meditation on 1 and 1 is 2 until I've heard it from Miss Holton at school, my teacher. I have to hear the words first. That's the material I use to then do my thinking. So we can hear that you think, this is spiritual? That's a bit odd. I thought spiritual was something holy. Well, honey, spiritual is life. And this is this approach. And so what they're saying is we can develop the most phenomenally capable levels of conceptuality at a more refined, subtle level. Like someone mentioned back there earlier, a savant, you know. You say to them what is, you know, they can tell you the most phenomenal piece of information because it's all stored in their mind. You have that level of capability, but not in that narrow-minded, sort of fanatic, kind of ego-focused way that a savant would have. You have a phenomenally capable level of ability to deconstruct all the misconceptions, all the way the mind works right now, the ego and how it all works. That's the stuff of a Buddhist thinker. You know, a mathematical thinker has all the complicated equations and stuff because they've learned that stuff. So one has that level of capability to deconstruct one's own ego constructs, to deconstruct all the misconceptions, the watertight, you know, construction of ego that we've been living with for eons. We have to deconstruct the misconceptions, see how they're lies and they're not based on truth, till eventually you've deconstructed it all until finally you've even deconstructed the one that's called ego grasping, which is the biggest, fattest, tightest, most primordial lie of all. But this whole approach sounds a bit abstract initially, you know, this way of talking, deconstructing the misconceptions. But this is the job one does. This is the job one has to do to liberate the mind from neuroses. Equals enlightenment. Not some special space in the sky. It's a mental state. It's the mind we are talking about, from here all the way to enlightenment. So concentration meditation. What we're trying to do is develop certain parts of, you know, the part of our mind, you can call it, it's called awareness. It's the part that does the seeing, the looking, you know. So it's just, okay, with our mind, you know, because we think of it as the brain, it's very hard to think, well, which part of it is vigilance and which part is alertness and where's the attachment and where's the love and where's the kindness. It's all a bit abstract for us. You know, maybe we can point to the part of the brain that's connected to depression. But as far as actually internalizing this stuff, that's not much use to you. All the great meditators in Tibet wouldn't have a clue where their brain is. They mightn't even know they have such a thing. But they know their mind because they've looked inside. So brain science is great. I'm not being even cynical here. But until you start being introspective and actually becoming familiar with your own thoughts and feelings, I don't care how much brain science you have. It is useless to you. Utterly useless. You have to have the capacity to be conscious of what's going on inside. And it sort of sounds pretty simple. We think, well, excuse me, I'm me, I know my mind. Well, it's just not true with respect to all of us. Because why? Because since we're tiny, our mind being embodied in this big fat bag of bones here, the gross body, we only can function at the gross level for a start. You know, even as a tiny child, we've got a body. And then secondly, because it's a desire, we're in a desire realm. What that means is we're in a body that is like a bag of desire, isn't it? It's got 5 bits and they all need feeding all the time. We will go mad if they're not. So what mainly occupies us since we're tiny is our senses. All our thoughts and feelings are responses to our sensory experiences. And then as we get older, you know, we fill the mind with more things. But the senses really run the show. We make the body the boss. Our sensory experiences are huge. And we are frantically attempting every second to get good sensory experiences. The second even the slight discomfort in the knee, we get upset, don't we? We're constantly trying to get comfort and feel good. Constantly. Feeding the attachment to the body. So this preoccupies us. The outside world is, in its nature, it's this dualistic world we live in. There's me, and then there's everything else, isn't it? That's how the world feels, isn't it? There's me, and then everything else. And so I'm seeing it, and hearing it, and trying to taste it, and get it to touch me, or whatever, you know. So this is how our life, we're preoccupied with this. So as we all know, mostly, we're not brought up to learn about the mind, to learn about our feelings. We're told about behaviour. My mother would tell me, at the first level of practice, she was good, behave well. When I got angry, don't get angry. But she didn't give me techniques to understand my anger. She didn't help me understand how the anger was mine. Even though my sister hit me, yeah, sure, that's Janet's hit, Robina, but darling, Bobsy, she called me Bobsy, but Bobsy, darling, your anger's yours. I didn't learn that until I heard the Buddhist talk. I knew it was my anger, but I was so utterly caught up in the philosophy that it was everyone else's fault that I got distracted, you know. So why would I want to look into my mind if it's everybody else's fault? We don't. We haven't learned. So here we are now, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever, not having spent much time being intelligently introspective. We are introspective when we think about ourselves, because we think about ourselves all the time. It's just the way ego is. And, you know, we're either spacing out, or we're totally preoccupied with getting the pleasure, or we're completely preoccupied with the pain and the hurt and the jealousy and the misery and the depression. So the introspection we have is mostly painful. So it's no wonder our mind feels like this completely unknown thing, full of chaos, so confusing, all the unconscious, all the subconscious, all the feelings. Don't know why we feel anything most of the time, because we're not noticing what's happening. So to notice what's happening in your mind is itself a really simple thing, but it feels immensely difficult, not because it's difficult, but because we've never done it. Well, that's because it's difficult. I mean, French is difficult when you can't speak it. But when you can speak it, it's second nature, you know. So the reason to begin to focus the mind, is so that we can, you know, so that we can have the skill to do intelligent introspection about what goes on in our own mind. Well, about karma and all the other things too. So we can unpack what's there, understand what's there, and then change what's there. That's what practice is. So, you know, hearing about karma, which seems like some interesting philosophy, as I've been saying already, that has a very powerful role in the way we think. So, because right now, you know, let's say having the samsaric philosophy, when I get punched in the nose, I interpret that in terms of samsara. I don't deserve it, I'm a victim, I didn't ask to get born, it's not my fault, it's his fault, punched him back, blah, blah, blah. That's a philosophy. It's your thoughts, but it's based on a philosophy, the philosophy of samsara. So thinking about karma, which seems intellectual, is then I change the way I think. I reinterpret my experiences. All this is part of. So I can only do that well if I have a reasonably focused mind. So focus, concentration is a starting point. Now, it happens immediately itself to bring some benefits. It could, it can. Depends on the person. When I first became a Buddhist, I thought it was a load of rubbish. Sit down, be silent for that period. I thought I'd go crazy. I didn't sit for 7 years. I hardly sit now. I do it on the walking. I've got I haven't got it on me, my iPod, all my prayers on it. I have my little, what do you call that little one? Shuffle, yeah. But I hate the new shuffle. They're so ugly. I've got the little new cute, I get the ones on Amazon, you know, get from old people, the little square one. They're gorgeous, very beautiful design. I have all my prayers on that, so I do my practice walking. But when I first became a Buddhist, I thought, meditate? What are you talking about? How boring. I've become a nun already, you know. Sit down and watch my mind. I couldn't think of anything worse. But I was able to do it by being on the go, you know. But to sit and try and get concentration, I thought I would explode. So just because you can't sit nicely, don't think you're a bad Buddhist. It's the biggest joke of all time. It doesn't matter, you know. I don't care if you sit on the toilet, if you sit on your head, if you do walking, you drive 100 miles an hour. Whatever works for you, if you can learn to look at your mind while you're doing it, go for it. But clearly there is an advantage to being able to sit and stop the sensory activity. It's very obvious, because that's the big distraction. And so the goal of sitting down, you know, and going beyond the body, that's why it's important to remember your body doesn't meditate. Your mind does. The body, in fact, is a big thing in the way. It's a drag. So for those of us, who do get uncomfortable when we sit, it's a real hassle. You're struggling with that much of the time. Now, some people can sit nicely and can feel quite good. Now, but that could be a big distraction because you think that's a good meditation. If you sit down in the morning and you do your meditation and you feel quite comfortable and you feel peaceful, which is nice, I'm not criticizing, but you think, oh, I had a good meditation today. Then another day, because you felt distracted and you're really struggling with something, oh, I didn't have a good meditation. Well, you're wrong. It's a good meditation if you have to really work on it. Just like if you're learning to be an athlete. You go to the gym, you're not going to come back feeling good. You'll be exhausted, puffing and panting, all your muscles hurting. But that's a good sign because you're changing something. If it doesn't hurt, it doesn't change. If you just do your push-ups until the point it starts hurting, oh, I did my push-ups today, you're lying to yourself. It's got to hurt. You've got to stretch yourself to go beyond the habits, the comfort zone. So absolutely, with working on your mind, being your own therapist, oh my goodness, that is true. So in your single point of concentration meditation, it's quite simple what you're trying to do. It's sort of like, this is my way of saying it, you're trying to get in between this magical place in the middle between these two extremes of the mind. One is the extreme of attachment. So one of the functions of attachment is when the mind is very caught up in it, the mind is very busy and excited. Excited. All over the place, When things are going well, we feel very excited. And if you're noticing your mind, this is what they mean by bipolar. When your mind is completely out of control, excited. Truly, it's just a question of degree. I'm not kidding now. When the mind is really berserk, out of control, there's no thermostat, you're gone. That's excitement. And that's a function of attachment mind. Gone crazy. And it's all kind of optimistic and positive, and you think you're Mozart, you think you can fly in the sky. That's when you're really gone, But that's the function when the mind is kind of the way we have happiness now, which is attachment happiness. That's how the mind gets, isn't it? All excited. Everything's possible. And then the other extreme is the depressed mode. So the way they talk in the single point of concentration, you've got excitement and then you have dullness, when the mind is dull. Now, that can be not necessarily depressed, but I'm talking at the emotional levels in our daily life now, just linking these two things. You've got the excitement mode when you're all gung-ho, everything's fantastic, you're so capable, wow, everything's brilliant, I'm in love, everything's perfect. Completely off the planet, It's good to be optimistic and confident, but it's mixed with attachment there, so you've lost the plot. So then when the mind plummets down to earth, it goes into this depressed mode, isn't it? Emotionally speaking. These are our two extremes in daily life. We can see up and down like yo-yos, So in concentration meditation, they talk more technically, the actual mind uncontrolled. They don't talk about an emotional level, but you can hear it. The mind's excited. You can't stop. You're sitting there, you're lying there trying to get to sleep. 3 hours later, your mind's still going. That's the excitement mode. And you're not conscious of it. You're not conscious of what you're thinking, are you? You're just caught up in this busy mind going crazy. Well, that's the major distraction, the major obstacle, one of the obstacles to getting concentration. The other extreme, the other obstacle is if you do sit down and you can feel quiet, which is very nice, immediately that goes to the other extreme of then you become kind of spaced out and dull. Now, the commonest misconception is that's a good meditation. Oh, I felt so good spacing out. Nothing wrong with relaxing. Nothing wrong with spacing out. Please do it. It's good for us. But it's not meditation. It's not concentration meditation. You've got to be on the alert like an eagle in this meditation to do it properly. It takes effort. It takes incredible sharp mind. Because the mind instantly is doing these two things. There's never a moment when we're not, at the moment, there's never a moment when we're not either excited or dull. So you've got to catch it like a hawk, like an eagle, whatever these birds. You've got to be so sharp and clear. That's why to do a 5-minute session is really tasty, because you've got to be on the alert every second. You can sit there for 45 minutes spacing out. You didn't achieve anything. You might as well just stay in bed. Don't come sitting up here cross-legged. It's wasting time. I'm really serious. Concentration and meditation is so precise in what you're trying to accomplish. It's a difficult, it needs enormous discipline and effort to do it properly. And the goal is to get a clear, sharp state of mind. That's the goal. So don't hold your breath, okay? In this life, most of us won't achieve it. It's possible. But there's many advantages straight away to sitting down and attempting to control your mind. The first one, as far as I'm concerned, the most immediate benefit is that you're learning to separate yourself from your thoughts. So right now, we know in daily life, we are completely absorbed like this, you know? We're so close to all our thoughts, like that 3 hours and you can't get to sleep at night. You can't remember what you were thinking for that 3 hours, but you know your mind didn't stop. But you have no awareness of what's going on. That's how we normally are. We're absolutely caught up, so close to it, we can't see it. That's why we're unconscious most of the day. We do not know what's going on in our own head, you know. So the great advantage of beginning to sit and, first of all, calm the senses. That's why it's practical to be in a nice, quiet place if you can. So our friends in prison don't have that luxury, you know. So they become amazing meditators because of it. They're surrounded by insane, violent noise, 20 hours of the day, many of them. And they do an incredible job, I tell you. One guy, one Michigan ex-gangster, Puerto Rican guy in Michigan, he said that he went to prison full of anger and rage. And these Latinos, they really like, the Latino gangsters, they're really into discipline. They really admire discipline. So they start to read about Zen and Buddhism and they like it, you know. It sounds like discipline. They like it, you know. So he thought, oh, good, he'll learn to meditate. And he heard you can get powers, cities, you know. So he started to meditate. He said he got a big shock. He got pleasure instead. He got good feelings instead. He never had such a thing. He was able to concentrate, you know. And he said, and I used to see this green light in my cell. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was feminine. So he started to read books and he discovered that her name was a Buddha called Tara, Green Tara. That's how come he became a Buddhist, he said. Anyway, many interesting experiences from the prisoners. So it's really practical to sit down and then to try and control the senses, subdue the senses, which means obviously, because we are so distracted, to be in a place where you're not going to get bombarded by noise and sights and sounds, you know, and all the other experiences of the senses. It's practical, it's reasonable. Because then you can start to attempt to focus on the mental processes. So the most immediate benefit of doing this is that you actually start to notice your thoughts. So if you're using your breath as your focus, like you're anchoring your mind to the breath, that's what you're doing. You're attempting, the goal of the meditation is real simple, is to focus on the breath. If the breath is your object, you can use many objects in meditation. The breath is a good example. So you're staying there, but you can't help but notice all the thoughts. They're screaming along as usual, aren't they? And normally speaking, as soon as thoughts come, the most strong ones, we follow them. And within 5 minutes, you're writing a depressed novel. Then another 5 minutes later, you're writing an attachment novel. That's what we do all day. No wonder we're tired by the end of the day. We have worked really hard all day on all the neuroses, non-stop. I mean, literally non-stop. And you know what is so depressing and so shocking is that the view of all the materialist models of the mind is this is normal. This is acceptable. This is usual. There's no concept in any materialist models of psychology of getting single-pointed concentration. That's religion, you know. I mean, it's so embarrassing. We think we're intelligent in the West. Sometimes we're really pathetic. So no one ever tries to control their mind. I mean, it's terrible. No wonder we're all crazy. It's no wonder we're not crazier, in my opinion. So the marvellous immediate benefit of attempting to focus on your breath, I'm not even saying actually accomplishing it, don't worry about that, is that you're actually doing the job of keeping your focus here and then you're separating yourself from your thoughts. They're all going to come. And in the beginning, they're just flooding as usual. It's just this big pack of emotions. There's no clarity about what's going on. But gradually, one can stay objective. and then can start to hear the thoughts. We get a little bit separate from them. This is the miracle. This is the great advantage. Because that's what we are attempting to do. We're trying to be intelligently introspective. We're trying to notice what we're thinking. And so when you get up off your meditation cushion, you bring that skill into your daily life. So then you slowly start to notice the angry thoughts before they come out the mouth. That's the miracle. That's the brilliance. That is fantastic. So I don't care if you don't get single-pointed concentration. But if you can learn to do this, that's the one technique we have to learn. This intelligent introspection. This ability to notice my thoughts. Unbelievable. But not easy, because we've never tried to do it. And there's levels. I mean, there's millions of thoughts every second. They even say this in Western psychology. So it just seems like this massive wall of emotions. And we only notice any particular emotion only when it's screaming out loud. Are you hearing my point? You know, a person, like with me in my life, anger was a really strong habit. My mother didn't have to teach me. I knew it well, believe me. And so for me, I didn't take much time for the anger to be triggered. I didn't have to work on it. So the second I felt it, it was out the mouth. There seemed to be ever no separation between thinking it, feeling it, and saying it, out the mouth. But the point was, I didn't know I was angry until it came out the mouth, because I didn't notice my thoughts. I didn't notice my feelings. Now, some of you people might get depressed and not so much vomit out. So you only know you're depressed when one day you just can't get out of bed. But the fact of the matter is, and this is the point about the Buddhist view of the mind, is that emotion we talk about. I was talking about single point of concentration. Never mind, this is helpful. Well, let me think. Stop for a minute. Okay, let me stay with, I'll go to that one. I want to talk about that one. This of the way, of the emotion, how the emotions and the thoughts, how they're linked, and the physical experiences. All of that. It's about the mind. But let's just finish on this single point of concentration. So the two extremes, okay? The excitement mode or the dull mode. And all single point of concentration is when you've accomplished it, is you've finally completely conquered these two extremes. And the mind has found this magical space, and it's just my way of saying it, in the middle, where now you can be absolutely sharp and clear as a needle. And inevitably the mind then is more subtle, unbelievably far more subtle and refined. And that is at this level, not quite at the same level as what they call subtle, but pretty subtle. And because this level of consciousness is not conceptual, not gross conceptual, because it's more subtle, it has the capacity to see past and see future and see beyond the senses. It's no longer kind of imprisoned by the gross body. The gross conceptuality has ceased. The gross conceptuality has ceased, and one has accessed this more subtle level of cognition, which is super clear, super refined, super talented. Because you don't disappear into space when you have this, because when you want to now do your insight meditation, you bring to bear whatever level of concentration you've got, whatever level of clarity, and you go to your insight mode. And then even when you've got a very subtle level, not very subtle, but quite a subtle level of consciousness, you utilize that to think, to do the deconstructing, to do the analysis. You can have super sophisticated analysis and very quickly deconstruct all the nonsense, all the ego's lies, all the misconceptions. Super capable. But also you can just simply have, so what happens is, okay, you do your concentration. You've got some level of concentration. You then go to your insight mode and you take your topic that you're going to meditate on, like your impermanence or karma or emptiness or whatever, from what you've heard. And then you think it through. You do this really logical, clear type of thinking. And then it triggers an insight. It triggers an insight, a small one even. So what you do is immediately stop the analysis and you hold the insight with your single point of concentration. But not on your breath this time, but on that insight. On that insight. And then you keep developing that. That's how you learn anything, isn't it? You learn it first, you get a bit of an insight, you do it again until eventually you've perfected it. Same here, same here. All this is really, this single point of concentration, is this marvelous, sophisticated psychological technique that everybody should use. All the mathematicians, all your musicians. We'd all be geniuses in our field if we had this capacity. It's a brilliant technique, and it's psychology. So what you're doing in this, when you're trying to accomplish this single point of concentration, in the Lamrim text, they describe it in terms of 9 stages. I'll bring a book one time and read out. It's very, very, very nice. It's a summary of each of the stages, you know. And so each of the stages, you're trying to conquer the dullness and the excitement. Sometimes one, sometimes more, sometimes the other. So it's you're constantly on the alert. You're really working hard at this thing. It needs enormous discipline and effort. I remember interviewing a Swiss monk friend of mine who's like a professional meditator, been meditating for 30 years, you know. And he's telling me about one of his meditations in Spain, Urselding near Granada, a couple of hours out of Granada, one of the FPMT centres, the centres connected to Tushita. And he was there for about a year and a half. And he said, you know, he said, you have to work unbelievably hard at it. You have to have such effort, such discipline, every second. So this seems to us sometimes contradictory because we think it's all to do with no effort and just blah, 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 all these cliches, you know. But what you're trying to do is achieve something we have never managed to have, which is a focused mind. It's like there's mountains of junk in there that are, you know, are sort of what we're struggling against. So what's interesting too, when they talk about the prerequisites, the ideal prerequisites for the person who's, you know, ready to go off to the mountains for a couple of years. You're already a pretty advanced person by that point. They have another packaging of Buddhist teachings called the 3 higher trainings. The third one is wisdom, getting wisdom, realizing emptiness, perfecting that, seeing the way things are. But in order to get wisdom, you've got to have single point of concentration, the second one. But in order to get single point of concentration, you've got to have the first one called morality. And that means subduing the body, speech and mind. And that's the day-to-day work we're all doing. So you might never actually get single point of concentration in this life. Who cares? We're practicing morality. We're controlling our body and speech and mind. And this is stupendous. This is the real practice. And then if we do attempt to get it, you'll get it quite easily. Because the prerequisites would be that, you know, you've got to be a person who completely has subdued the grosser levels of attachment and anger and all the other delusions. Completely content with whatever food they get. Completely content with whatever clothing. No responsibilities in the world. No one relying upon them. Nothing in the world. So if you could walk out this door now with what you've got on your body this minute and walk out the door and not turn back and keep going to the mountains, then you're ready. So who's ready like that? None of us. Got this mountain of life we're dragging with us, you know, and the junk inside. Because, you know, if you're miserable or depressed or jealous or who can concentrate? Forget it, you know. So the daily work of working on your mind, and this is where, you know, all the Buddhist practices, and we're going to talk about these, you know, how they function to help us purify our mind. This is, you're getting ready to get concentration. You're doing the preliminary practices, as they call it. You're learning to harness the craziness of this body, speech, and mind. Fantastic. Then concentration, easy. But meanwhile, we can start where we are, you know. So does that make sense, people? A little bit? Any questions about all that? Any questions about all that, please? About meditation in particular? Yes, darling?
You mentioned that Buddhism is the only religion that seeks to attain higher levels of consciousness.
I don't think I said that, and if I did, I apologize.
You said unlike Hinduism and Catholicism.
Unlike what?
Hinduism.
I did not say that. Absolutely did not.
Okay, I thought I heard that.
No, I did not say that, because I'm saying repeatedly, Buddha got his techniques from Hinduism.
Okay.
No, I'm not saying that. Please forgive me. I'd say too rough sometimes. And even it's not true about Catholicism. I love all those amazing stories about all the saints, you know. When I was a little girl, I was so into God. I loved reading about all these great saints and their amazing experiences. There are so many amazing Christian meditators. So even if I said that, it's wrong. So forgive me. I can sound very rude sometimes. So I apologize. Okay. Someone else. Yes.
I can't really understand if there is differences in the importance of the thoughts and the act and
Of the what, sweetheart?
thoughts
Yes.
act by the karma, by our life. If I'm thinking something, is it as much
I see.
good as
I
I'm
understand.
speaking it?
Yeah, I understand. Let's talk about that later. Can you keep that question? I just want to, if there's anything on, particularly on the meditation now, just so we can move forward. But please keep that question. It's a good question. Yeah. Yes.
This question might fall a little more into the practical, a little bit of feedback on what we've been doing so far. When I registered for the course, I noticed we had, like, on the internet, there were like 2 meditation sessions.
That's right.
In the evening.
That's right.
I noticed that that's changed.
That's right.
And so we only have about the 20-minute meditation in the morning.
That's right.
And I know it's critical, and I hear you saying
And the evening
this.
one, was an evening meditation, wasn't there? You don't call that a meditation? There you go. You see, you have a series of assumptions about meditation that I would suggest you have to change. You've got a view of meditation, of being mindfulness. And because you're not getting that, you feel you're not getting meditation. But remember, I defined meditation before in a different way, didn't I?
Yeah.
Are you disappointed? That's okay.
No, not disappointed. It's worked for me to, work with my practice in any scenario that we're in. But I do find that, a lot of your teaching is getting out of the mind.
It's what?
It's getting out of this conceptual.
It's what? What do you say?
Getting out of the world of conceptions.
Getting out of the world. I don't understand you. Can you say a bit more clearly? Say it again.
Moving from the day-to-day conceptual world into these subtler levels of consciousness.
You're losing me, I'm afraid, completely. Can you come back to the beginning and say, forgive me, but do you mind doing that? Start again. Can you get a bit closer to the mic?
Sure.
Thank you.
So we're talking a lot about how to expand our consciousness.
Are we? Is that your word?
That's my understanding.
What do you mean by that?
To sort of drop a lot of the conceptual, conventional views that we've gathered throughout our life.
Such as?
Such as right and wrong.
I never mentioned that ever once.
Good and bad.
Never said those words, ever once. You're talking your own stuff here, not what I'm saying. I have not heard me say that ever once. I would never say that.
Fair enough. But I'm not here to argue, and
Sorry?
I'm having my own experience, and I'm sharing that with you.
Of what? Experience of what? I'm not trying to make it complicated. I'm really not. I'm trying to communicate with you.
I think there's a contradiction in, you're asking us to analyze. You have said this. And you can analyze a single sentence of your teachings for a lifetime.
That's right, exactly.
Right?
That's right, exactly. That's right.
And I guess I'm just finding we have 6 or 8 hours of teaching.
So basically what you're saying is there's too many thoughts and not enough space.
I'm just, I'm providing.
No, I'm not complaining.
Yeah,
I'm trying to
I'm
understand
providing,
you.
that's my
I
feedback.
understand that point exactly.
Yeah.
But may I say this? As I was saying to Richard, because he leads the meditations here, him and another fellow during the courses here. And I come along, busybody me, and I come along, I change it. I took out the 5 o'clock one, and, the morning one is there. The evening one we did meditate, but you don't call it meditation because you're thinking of mindfulness. And I understand your point. But maybe what's expected of you here, if you're able to do it, is maybe change some of the views in your own mind about what you're trying to get from this course. And I'm not being rude to you here, because this is my whole point. We've all got different views, what we mean by spiritual, what we mean by meditation, and what even we mean by what we're trying to do. Like you just said, I've been saying we're trying to get, go beyond the contradiction of good and bad. I never use those words. That's your view, and I'm not complaining. So what's happening here is bumping into your view of meditation and spiritual practice. And again, I'm not complaining, but this is the way it is. And so what I'm asking of you, if you can, maybe, it's okay, is one of my things, like I said to Richard at the beginning, I don't mind if there aren't too many mindfulness meditation sessions. Because frankly, I think most of us misconceive these, and I'm not saying you do, but that's for you to find out, that we like to sit there and space out. I don't think we're doing much use in those meditations, to be perfectly honest. Getting a bit of space, because we're all so crazy, we need the space, so that's good. But what I want to mainly achieve in this course is to stuff you as full as possible with Buddha's teachings, so that you can spend the rest of your life analysing them. I'm using that opportunity. I want to give you the big picture of Buddha's view, stuff you full of it. And if you want to, you can take the tapes, and then you can learn and listen to it and think about it then. So this is what you're trying to do here. It's a cramming course. Hang on a tick. That's my goal. Now, if you don't want that, that's cool. I'm not even criticising. I'm just talking now. So maybe relax into it, enjoy it, just listen to it, and let it go float in, And then you can, you're being silent. You can be meditating on your mind all the time. You're being silent while you're not listening to the teachings. There's an awful lot of hours of this. Do you understand? You can be doing that. You could be meditating yourself at night. You could do it in lunchtime. You've got several hours you can do your own mindfulness meditation. You could if you think that's really important. But my goal is to give you as much as I can of Buddha's teachings. That's my goal.
Thank you. Yep, thank you.
So please enjoy if you can. Yes? Say it again, darling, on the mic so people can hear it, would you? Thank you. Yes?
Are we now, with the new schedule, having 3 days of solid meditation at the end instead
That's
of
going to
2?
be, and they're not going to be silent. They're going to be me and Richard leading you through essential points of everything you've heard here in the order of this Lam Rim. They're going to be meditations, yeah. Guided meditations.
Yeah.
Thinking, analytical meditations, yeah.
Yeah.
As well as some mindfulness, yes.
I just wanted to confirm
Yes.
it will be 3 days.
Well, is that what it says on the schedule?
Yeah. The new schedule says
Okay, but
3
please
days.
don't hold your breath. It might change, okay?
Okay.
Okay, it might change. But that's the plan right now.
Okay.
All right?
Can I also ask you very quickly, we talked a lot there about the concentration meditation,
Yes.
and that we might not get it in this lifetime.
That's right.
But we're practicing morality,
Yes.
and I didn't, excuse me, but I didn't quite grasp
The
what
point.
you said.
Okay, so morality means controlling, learning to subdue the body, the speech, and the mind, and especially the mind, of course. Meaning that if you really have accomplished the practice of morality, you'd be a very blissful guy. You wouldn't have much anger, jealousy, depression, attachment. You'd be very focused. This is even without doing much meditation. You'd be a very easygoing, spacious, loving, relaxed human being. That's what morality brings. And then that is a person who is then easily qualified to go to the mountains and achieve single-pointed meditation very quickly. That's what I meant by that. But of course we can do them all side by side. Because each of us, what's your name? Keith. We've all got very different minds. And I can hear, some people, we've all got very different minds, We've got very different approaches and we all know what we need. So Keith clearly knows what he needs, and maybe he's not getting what he needs here, and I'm sorry, but maybe, that's whatever. But it's like we've got to know what we... So some of us, maybe like I'm saying like me when I said I didn't even sit for 7 years, because it's my nature. But I like to do it on the run. But another one of my friends, she can't survive if she doesn't sit every day. So each of us has to know what's necessary for us, because we've all got different kinds of minds. We have different ways of approaching things. So what to do, I'm this kind of person, I'm sorry. And sometimes it suits some people and sometimes it doesn't, And I apologize for that. We're all very different. So I hope you all get something anyway. Any more complaints? It's all right, I'm not complaining. Yes, go on. Then we can, what time is it? 10:20. Okay, we're fine. Go on.
Okay, I live in North America where very much so sport is a religion for us. Don't take the words literally.
Yeah.
But in Buddhism, we've spoken a lot about dulling the senses or detaching from the senses.
Not dulling the senses.
Okay,
Absolutely not.
correct.
Subduing. Maybe having more control, more understanding of what's going on, and not buying into them every second.
Okay.
Yeah.
Professional athletes and expert athletes, they have incredible concentration.
Yes.
And they have many experiences of being able to attune to cellular
Yes.
vibrations
Yes.
and whatnot.
Yes.
And I worked as a personal trainer, and I'm very interested in the mind-body connection.
Right.
But in Buddhism so far, and what I've seen, there's not so much on mastering the body. And for me, and through sports, it
Sure.
seems like they've mastered the body so
Yes.
much that it's helped them to attain to a more, to master the
No,
mind.
that's true. It's a good. I mean, look at yoga. You know, yoga
Right.
coming from the Hindu tradition. Yoga is an amazing system of working with the body to get into the mind. So yes, absolutely what you're saying. But this one is the other way around. This is getting through the mind into the. Is working on the mind, going straight to the mind.
So it
This approach we're taking
transcends
here.
the body.
Huh?
It completely transcends the body.
Well, I mean, not so much transcend as just not pay it, there's not, the techniques we're discussing here, the methods we're talking about here don't bring in the body. In the esoteric teachings, in Buddhist Tantra, there's more awareness, but at the subtler level of the body. When the body can, I mean, the great meditators, there's one biography I'm writing at the moment of one great meditator. And because he was was a great, realizing all these things we're talking about here, renunciation, emptiness, compassion, all these things, and a great meditator. And he lived up in the mountains for and this is very common, 20 years, naked, no food, no sleep, in a little hole in the mountains with no front on it, 6 foot of snow in the winter. So working through, and he did not concentrate on his body, believe me. He worked on his mind. But because he was a great tantric yogi, and they have this deep this incredible ability to be aware of their subtler level of physical energy. Then on the basis of this, he had complete control over everything. Totally harnessed his body. So there's different ways of doing things. We communicating? Okay. Yes. Geshe Lama Kontrog. Yeah. Geshe. Anyway, whatever. So, okay, what I wanted to talk about. Okay. Yes, Dale. Speak close to the mic.
Is it working now?
Yeah, better.
You've used the metaphor quite a bit for being your own psychotherapist. I wonder if you can tease that out a little bit more about kind of the attitude, the approaches, the techniques that you use with the analytical material.
Yeah, well, that's really what yeah, okay. Yes, that's what we're doing all the time, really. Yeah. So what I wanted, yes. Okay, yeah. So let's now talk about, this might come into it all. Let's talk about, you see, okay, in the Tibetan tradition, if you're doing it in the way they, in the way they lay it out, you become very sophisticated, very logical. And you have to, it's really, the way they say that you need to do it well, you'd be a great logician to be able to do it well. You do your 30 years of study on all the logic and memorize all the texts in the monastery. Your mind is honed to the most phenomenal degree. And now you can apply that to your very sophisticated level of analysis in your meditation and get realizations very quickly. Well, I would suggest most of us don't have that level of concentration or intellectual skill. So we do our best in being our own therapists. We sort of muddle along. So it just means being intelligent, I use that word, intelligently introspective. As you're having a communication with somebody, and this comes from even doing a bit of sitting, being aware of what is happening inside you as it's happening, before it gets out the mouth. This is the big thing, isn't it? This is the one. Because look at the problems we have. Every time we start talking, especially when it's a close friend, it's all out the mouth and it's done. The damage is done, And we don't even know we thought it until it came out, because we're not noticing. So it's just this gradual skill that we develop, that's all. It's a gradual skill. And the components of this are do some sitting, do some focus. Train yourself just technically to focus on one thing, because then you're training yourself not to follow every thought. That's the thing that you're doing mostly in single point of concentration. You're training yourself not to follow every thought, and that's the miracle. And that's what brings the skill. And then in your life, you can bring that to bear. And they just keep getting better and better and better at it. But then alongside that, you have to learn the Buddha's model of the mind. Because when you do think about it, when you do observe what you're thinking, you have a view in the mind about how you interpret it. Do you understand what I'm saying? So so here we're talking Buddha's view, the view of karma, the view of emptiness, these different views that become slowly one's philosophy, one's way of interpreting what one is seeing. So there's this technical skill of learning how to focus, then the skill to notice what you're thinking, and then you have to bring to bear the view that you're using to interpret that. Because it doesn't exist from its own side, this way or that. Like I said, because I'm a Buddhist attempting to have the view of karma, when I get punched in the nose, having done some awareness, I'm noticing what I'm thinking as I'm thinking it. And so then I'm changing my interpretation from the ego view, from the self-pity view, to the appropriate view, which in my case would be the view of karma, the view of forgiveness. And they're words in my head that I've got to say to myself. So you've got to have a view first. We've got to look at what our philosophy of life is. We tend to think we're all walking around life. I don't have a philosophy, we'll say. I'm not a communist. I'm not a feminist. I'm not a Jew. I'm not a Catholic. I don't have a philosophy. Absolute nonsense. Every one of us in this room has a watertight view of every single thing we experience. We have a philosophy. Every one of us. It's a Keithism, or it's a Robina-ism, or it's a Jasonism. We've all got our own ism, It might label it, some could be Buddhist and some could be Catholic and some could be communist, but it's our own story, our own view of interpreting the world. So we've got to look at that view and see if it's in sync with reality, is what Buddha's saying. So, okay, in my case, I'm using Buddha's view of interpreting the world as my view, taking that as my hypothesis as the truth right now, until I find that Buddha's wrong. I'm happy with that. So we're thinking things all the time, interpreting all the time, based on a certain philosophy. Based on the philosophy of what I expect, what I don't expect, what she should be, what's right, what's wrong. We've all got these views. And we're trying to unpack all of that, and look freshly at it all. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah, yes. Would you like to give the microphone, please? Sorry, darling, hang on a second. Please. Yes.
My question is related to yesterday's talk, but since I didn't get a chance to ask you the question yesterday, I hope you won't mind my asking it today. Is there any rationale behind karma spread across several lives as opposed to karma in one lifetime? Is there any rationale behind it?
Yeah. Okay. Can we keep that one too? Can you keep that one? And because I want to talk about the mind here. And I want to go more about karma later, so please keep that one, yeah. Okay, so what I want to talk about here, touching on, what's your name again? No, what's your name? No, the other one. Brent, and your Will. Okay, I forget sometimes all your names, I'm sorry. So this is touching on Brent's point of the relationship between the body and the mind. And this gets us to this tantric model of gross body, gross consciousness, subtle body, subtle consciousness, etc., Obviously, there's this intimate relationship, absolutely intimate, interdependent relationship. So much so that you can't have an eyeball, you can't have eye consciousness, you can't see something without an eyeball. But there's eye consciousness, which is not the body, and then there's the body. They're two separate phenomena, but they work together. This is the point. So, when it comes to emotions, this is a very interesting point. As I've been saying, the Buddhist view about the mind and how it functions is that all of our day-to-day life, all the concepts, the thinking about mathematics, all the thinking about the music we're playing, all the feelings of jealousy and anger and love and kindness, whether it's called thoughts, whether it's called creativity, whether it's called emotions, all of the unconscious, the intuitive, all of this, they all come down to being a series of thoughts, concepts. The mind is conceptual at this gross level. So that's initially really surprising, isn't it? Anger is conceptual. What are you talking about? Jealousy is conceptual. It just seems not possible, So let's, again, unpack that. Because my feeling is, once we can see how all the emotions, which are the ones that drag us from pillar to post, all the emotions, which feel so real and truly physically based, We think of emotions as like physical experiences. Once we can understand that they all come down to being thoughts, this shows us how we can change our mind. This shows us how we can get enlightened. Because it's interesting, in our materialist world, in our contemporary world, you know, we concretize emotions more than anything. We know, for example, that you've never learned music before, but someone can see that you've got some potential. You wouldn't even know how to read one note, but you go to school for a few years and you can become a musician. You can write amazing pieces for orchestras, you know. So we know we can change our mind from not knowing anything to knowing an awful lot of things. But when it comes to changing emotions, we don't think it's possible. We concretize emotions. We can be geniuses in learning new conceptual thoughts. We know we can do it. We're brilliant at it. But when it comes to changing emotions, we are like babies. Because we think, this is who I am. I'm an angry person. But we don't think, I mean, if we thought every day, oh, I'm a non-music making person, well, you'll never learn music. But you know there's potential that you can learn it. But why not the same with anger? Why do we think, this is who I really am? It's because it's an emotion, is my feeling, and because it comes so spontaneously. So therefore we think, oh, it's natural, it's normal, it's real, it's who we really are. That's how we think, you know. And this is the biggest mistake. Because if we think about it, you know, what causes our suffering is the emotions. That's the level where we can think about suffering, you know. It's the emotions, the anger, the attachment, the jealousy, those ones. So that's where when we first started talking, you know, about how there's these different synonyms for these states of mind. And one of them is that they are delusional. It's a delusional, so anger, for example, or attachment is a delusional state of mind, meaning it's a conceptual story that isn't in sync with reality. So let me use an extreme example of attachment. Mainly for most of us, maybe the strongest attachment emotion is when it comes to another person, a body, you know, sex. I mean, you might get excited when you eat nice food, but not as excited as that, isn't it? So let's analyze that experience. I'm trying to bring it all down to earth, you know. So because it's such a vivid physical experience, we would all assume that, you know, sexual attachment is a physical experience. It's a physical thing, we'll say. Now, and I remember my friend Panos, who's Greek. He's really like sex, Panos. And he, I think he's calmed down a bit now. He's got a wife, but he used to, whatever. But he said when he was 6, walking down the street. Okay, this is now bringing in. What is your name? The Venerable Nun. Are you a nun? Yeah. What? You're not a nun. You just look like a nun. Okay, what's your name? So, oh, you told me already, didn't you? No, maybe you didn't. Sonia, really? I'm so sorry. I know it's true. There are 2 Sonias, aren't there? So forgive me, Sonia. I'll remember. Okay, this is already bringing in your question, Sonia. Because the simple answer to your question is no way possible. That's the answer. But every time you hear, so this is an example again. Okay, of how it brings in your question. So there's my friend Panos. He was 6 years old, walking down the street in Athens with his mummy, his Greek Orthodox mummy, and he saw this kind of half-naked lady on a poster outside the cinema. And he said, "Mummy, why is my penis standing up?" Now, in the Western model, that simply proves that sexual attachment is physical. Wouldn't you agree? The little body does its thing, you know? Little thing stands up. But another way to interpret it is in the Buddhist view, which is the one of karma. That we can deduce that that Panos had strong connection with girls. It was girls that turned him on, you know. If you're a furry, it's a furry animal that turns you on. I don't know if you hear about furries, but that's another discussion. People who are into having sex with their stuffed toys, you know. You look up on the internet, it's very fascinating. Anyway, never mind them. Now, the other example I talked about was the fisherman, little boy. Since he was born, since he's a tiny boy, he runs to the river. So this is the one of karma, you know. Where did that imprint come from, that tendency? This is the Buddhist one, that you're imprinted with these tendencies. So we're talking here about the body and the mind relationship. So when it comes to sex, and we think, oh, all these poor men, all you sexual crazy men who can't help it, and then, there's a couple of guys I know in Australia who've been in prison for raping people. And so one of them they've given him all these drugs, to lessen his physical, masculine energy, right? To sort of calm his, because we all think in the materialist world that it's a physical thing. So if you change the body, but he, like other people I've heard about, they maybe can't get it up anymore, but his mind doesn't stop thinking about raping girls. So the point that Buddhism's saying, and this is the point about my friend Panos, his little mind was programmed with attachment to girl shapes, So he said all the time he was completely obsessed with sex. When he was 12 and he saved up enough of his first pocket money, he didn't buy a train, he bought a prostitute, He loved going to the prostitutes. He really liked having sex. So we can say he was attached to sex. That was his preoccupation. That was the thing was in his mind. So because it is sex, and because the attachment to a physical body, in his case, triggers so much powerful experience in the body, that's why we think it's a physical thing. But listen to this. It's so simple. When Panos, let's say, was in love with one of his girlfriends and everything stood up and did its job, but what happens when he doesn't like her anymore? Let's say he looks at her now and she looks ugly to him. Believe me, nothing stands up anymore. I mean, I'm trying to be crude here, but can you get my point? Because it's run by the mind. If the mind has a view, the attachment has got a story, and he was programmed with that story, and he just sees a poster and his little stories are activated. It's a mental procedure. Then his body follows afterwards. The thing stands up. The stuff happens, all the feelings we have, And they describe this in great detail, the subtle physical energies, in the Buddhist tantric approach to the mind, to the body. That the mind is the first one. So basically, when you're programmed with attachment, and for him it was so spontaneous, he didn't notice he had all these stories. He didn't have to learn the stories. They were programmed in his mind, like the fisherman. He saw the river, it triggered all those stories, he ran to fishing. Panos, he just saw a poster. It hadn't occurred to him until then. But he saw that poster, he was 6, and the stories were triggered by the physical condition called the poster of a girl with, 2 lumps on her chest or whatever it is. So his little mind did its stories. But they're so spontaneous, and this is the point. We don't notice that they're stories, but you only notice if you have a physical experience. So for me, with anger, which is a habit, the physical experience of anger is you get excited and the tears come and the spit comes out the mouth and the blood comes and the eyes look big and the words come out strong. That's the physical experience of anger, isn't it? Well, I didn't notice my thoughts. I only noticed the physical. And because we're such sensory beings, we need to get the physical signs of what's going on inside us because we don't know how else to access it. And so we can see, from Brent's story, that when you can work on the body, this can trigger mental experiences. Absolutely, no question. And I can imagine with training your body to the degree that athletes do, you have phenomenal mental experiences, which you also get from meditation. So there's different approaches, But it's showing, again, this relationship between the body and the mind. So with us, this is the business about karma. This is the Buddhist view of karma. That these strong emotional habits we have, anger, attachment, whatever you might have, torture, fishing, maybe it's not a strong emotion, but they're habits, then the body, they are stories in the mind, way deep down, but they're so kind of intuitive, they're so instinctive, these stories, they happen so spontaneously that we don't notice the story, we only notice the physical. So Panos didn't notice his mind until he became a Buddhist 40 years later, 30 years later. Notice that he had attachment thoughts, And so then how you change attachment is not by giving the poor fellow a drug, because his mind will still keep going. You change the thoughts. And then, as I'm proving with Panos, when he no longer is in love with that girl, his thoughts are now different. He doesn't have attachment thoughts for her. He has anger thoughts. And so there's no sexual feeling because he doesn't like her. So it proves it's not physical. That to me proves it's not physical. There is a physical experience, no discussion about that. It's a very real experience, but that is not attachment. The physical experience itself is merely the body, but it's linked to the mind, and whatever's going on in the mind determines the physical experience. That's how come this yogi, who has completely transformed his mind, beyond all delusions, beyond all ego, and is able to go to a subtle level of his mind and experience bliss and generate heat in his body. He can do what he likes. His body's meaningless. He can do what he likes. He lives there naked 25 years in the snow, you know, feeling happy because his mind had changed. And that, I think, is where the limitation would be, Brent, that I think no matter how much you train your body, until you've trained your mind, you can only go so far. One of those athletes could not survive in the snow like he did. Because even though they've trained their body to a phenomenal degree, until you've trained your mind to go way beyond even that, the body would collapse and die. This yogi, he didn't eat. This is very common among many of the meditators. They don't need physical nourishment. Do you see what I'm saying here? The point, yeah, okay. It's just an interesting point, that's all. Yeah. Oh, I didn't disagree with that. I agreed with that before. Well, no, okay, that's a good point. But concentration we're talking about here, Brent, is the concentration you're talking about is when it's linked to the physical, which is the gross level. We're talking about concentration at a subtle level when the body is not functioning. If you were to test the brain of a meditator in deep meditation, they would have no brain activity. Their body's like dead. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. So let's look at how, so that's just an example, the one of attachment, this fierce physical experience, so real, but it's absolutely coming from the thoughts in the mind of the person. So what is attachment then, in that sense? Let's say using panos as an example. It's this completely over-exaggerated, over-excited, over-exaggerated view of the deliciousness of the female form. So real in his mind. I mean, join the club, we're all the same when it comes to sex, you know. We so externalize that form that he just has to think about, the two lumps on the chest and the legs that way and the hole in the middle and all these things. Excuse me, I know I'm very direct, but make sure, I'm sorry. Okay. Nothing wrong, okay? And that's all it is. There's a male who's got flat chest and different things, but we so kind of believe these shapes have a real meaning, But it's just over eons of time we've put this meaning onto these shapes. Boy shape, girl shape, this shape, that shape. So there's a person who's called a furry, this little boy, when he was 7, I read an article in Vanity Fair, And again, this brings the view of karma, Sonia. We can deduce that he is programmed with attachment views about animal forms. So one could deduce here, one could argue maybe coming from having enormous attachment to pets, enormous attachment to your stuffed animals, to cartoons. Then this multiplies and comes into the next life as this boy, when he was 7, he said he was American, he was at the sports, and he said he used to get turned on by the Mickey Mouse mascot. Not by all the dancing girls, And he didn't know why. His mummy didn't teach him this. He was really confused about it and got very depressed because he knew he was a bit weird. But then as he got older and the internet came along, he started, Googling, or maybe pre-Google. And he discovered there are a lot of people like this. And so now there's this whole group of people call themselves furries. They're all variations of them. But their he talked, his preoccupation, his preferred object of sexual activity is his stuffed animals. He tried human, appropriate-sized, real animals like Alsatians, but he found that boring. He prefers his stuffed monkey and his stuffed turtle or whatever. Okay. So there's your fisherman, little boy, runs to the river. He likes fishing, gets blissed out. There's Panos, sees a girl shape, gets blissed out, runs to it, There's this boy who sees a Mickey Mouse mascot. He discovers he likes animals. So, again, the view of karma. Where else the hell did this come from? We can't explain where did this come from, except in the mind. This is a good, at least propose this idea. He brought the habit with him from attachment to animals. And look at our world. Cartoons, personified animals. I'm not critical here. I'm just looking at imprints in the mind. Because karma says every split second of whatever we see and do and say leaves an imprint in the mind. Programs your mind. So this little boy, whoever he was programmed with animals are gorgeous. And so this is what's interesting about attachment. You know, if I'm a Christian, I'm not being rude again. I'm always rude, I suppose. I should stop apologising. I'm rude, okay? But when I was taught as a Catholic, the sexual, thing was a special gift from God. Well, Buddha just says it's a habit of over-exaggerating the deliciousness of something to the point where your whole body gets blissed out. So for the torturer, he got blissed out. He had his orgasms when he tortured people. Panos when he had girls. The fairy boy when he had sex with his monkey. The fisherman mightn't have had orgasms. So attachment is levels of it. And the stronger the attachment, meaning the stronger the exaggerating story, the more it triggers the energy in the body to have those nice feelings. That's all. The feelings in the body come from the stories in the mind. They're not existing from their own side. It appears this way if we look at Panos. Because we assume that God made him this way. Well, it has to be a gift from God. And you can't call the gift from God a torturer who has orgasms. We don't know about that one. The only way we can explain it is this. But the Buddha says he came programmed with the habit of attachment. In this case, fishing. In that case, torturing. In that case, stuffed toys, animals. And in this case, girls. And so in those cases, when it's extreme attachment, meaning a really elaborate, exaggerating story, preoccupying the mind day and night, then that triggers into what we call sex. We just give it the word. It's just the body responding in a very violent way, and indeed a very pleasing way, to meeting a certain object that the mind has made up a story about. This is how it works. Does this sound interesting? Does this sound reasonable? Does it sound food for thought, right? People? Okay then. So body and mind, emotions and thoughts, intimate relationship. So this is the point. Once we start to see our mind, once we start to get some objectivity, and slowly over the years for me, began to have the skill to notice the thoughts in the mind before the words came out the mouth and the damage was done. That's the skill we have to develop. And so the same with attachment. You can see it with any one of us. We mightn't have attachment to girls or furry animals, but food is a common one, isn't it? Attachment to food. So we think about it when it's not there. We think about having it. We think about not having it. We think about being on a diet. We think about being too fat. Then we think about being too thin, We think about the food and have this one, or maybe I have that one. Food is a real preoccupation for us. Well, maybe it's a better attachment than having attachment to sex, because it makes you look really miserable. That's a really intense attachment, I think. Not being rude to anybody if you've got it. Beg your pardon? What happened there? So this is attachment. The one about food, it's when you're preoccupied with it, thinking about it when it's not there. Going over it, thinking about it, working it out. Look at our bodies. Absolutely attached to our bodies. Every tiny bit, your little toenail, we're worried, we know the shape, this, think about too much there, well, there's this one, too small, too big, maybe this ear's that, hair that, this way. I mean, never stopping. I used to think I was so ugly. I look at photos of myself when I was young and I was kind of nice. I would have fancied me if I was a boy or whatever, girl. But I mean, I thought I was the ugliest, fattest, most miserable thing because I was obsessed with myself, My breasts were too big and I was jealous of my sister's small breasts. And why didn't the boys like me? Because they're supposed to like big breasts, and crying and jealous and miserable. My body always miserable, too fat, too thin, never stopping. That's attachment. That's how it works. Never satisfied. Attachment is never satisfied. Therefore, thinking about it all the time. I remember hearing about a guy whose main attachment was sex. It was like tortured mind. He talked about it. It was just like torture. Even as having sex with one girl, he was thinking about going to the next one. He couldn't stop. That's attachment. I mean, it's the most suffering state of mind. You're obsessed. We're all obsessive compulsives, whatever words they use in psychology. It's just a question of degree. Thinking about it. trying to get it, trying to stay away from it, trying to hit it, never stopping, going crazy. This is attachment. And these are thoughts. These are thoughts, people. What else are they? Let's say, let's say Brent doesn't get angry, like explosive angry. But let's say and we can see some people don't show their anger. But if we look into our minds, we can see we have angry thoughts. It's true. But, mostly, oh, yeah, Robina gets angry. Oh, no, Brent doesn't get angry. But let's say Brent is having angry thoughts. And so let's say we do an experiment, and there's Robina shouting out her angry words. So one of you type my words, and you have a little transcript of what I said. And then Brent writes on a piece of paper his angry thoughts. Now, if you mix those pieces of paper up, you wouldn't know the difference. You wouldn't know whether Brent shouted his words or he just had the thoughts. So that proves, again, anger comes down to thoughts. I did the added one, and this is getting to your point, I did the added one of saying the words, and that is worse. Yes, because I harm people with it. At least Brent didn't harm anybody with his anger. He just harmed himself. But I harmed me by having angry thoughts, and then I harmed the people I shouted at. So putting it into the physical absolutely is much worse. Yes. But can you get my point, people? And some people can have even more anger in their thoughts, can be like going crazy with rage, but don't express it. So it proves anger is thoughts. It proves it. It's anger is thoughts. It's a story. You can read the words. Anybody reading Brent's words and my words can go, oh, wow, they're pretty angry. So it's obvious it's thoughts, It's so clear. It comes down to thoughts. The attachment one. If Panos was able, to write down all his thoughts about girls, you can tell immediately that's attachment thoughts. But the thing with habit, which is karma, and since we're tiny children, we are habituated. Like I said, my mother didn't have to teach me how to be angry. Panos's mother didn't teach him to see girls in that way and stand his little thing up. It happened spontaneously. So as long as you have the view that your parents made you, then you can only deduce it has to be genes. As long as you have the view that God made you, then you've got to blame God for it. I'm not being rude here, but you've got to blame God. But if you have the Buddhist view, it's just an explanation, that's all, that you bring it with you. You bring the habits with you. Like you bring the habits today from yesterday. I bring yesterday's habits from the day before. So when I'm a tiny little girl, whether you're Hitler or Mother Teresa, they were already showing those tendencies when they were tiny. They were in their mind. In their mind. We can see from tiny children. We can see from tiny babies. Some just seem peaceful. And as they grow, they continue to show that peaceful. A friend of mine, she was taking the lice out of the head of her little boy. He was 3. It was Daichen in Queensland. Anybody from Queensland here? No? Anybody who knows Chen Razig? Daichen at Chen Razig. You know Daichen? Anyway, Daichen's son. Have you ever met her? You ever met him? Anyway, he lives, he's like 30 now. But she was taking the lice out of his head. And he was 3. And he was crying. Mummy, leave them alone. It's their home. Don't hurt them. Now, she hadn't taught him that. So he was imprinted with compassion. And since he's grown up to 30, he has continually shown that tendency. He's never killed any beings. He's completely kind. He's compassionate. So, since you're tiny, we can see the habits are there. So, of course, the question is, where do they come from? So here Buddha's saying, you bring them with you. They're in your mind. They're in your mind. They're brainwashed in your mind. And they're deeply instinctively there. So that's an interesting point. Okay, even what we call, we now get down to the ego business, the really deepest delusion of all, the most instinctive, the most primordial. So in Buddhist terms, they call it colloquially ego grasping, this primordial clinging, belief in a self-existent, inherent, intrinsic me. So in the West, we say we have a thing called instinct for survival, don't we? And we say we couldn't survive without it, or animals have it. So it means when you're attacked, you freak out. And we have to have this in order to be safe. Well, Buddha says a load of rubbish. Well, he doesn't. I'm saying that, but that's, He would call that ego grasping. He would call that this primordial delusion, that when the I is attacked, the I freaks out. But to say that you don't need it is the thing that Buddha says is nonsense. You can get rid of that. So there's a story too. Lama Zopa, when he was a little boy, he was recognized as the reincarnation of one of the previous meditators in the mountains up in Solokhumbu area in Nepal. Since a tiny boy, he was recognized. So then he was about 8. He's already known as Rinpoche, you know, this title they give, precious one. And he was up in the mountains, and he was with his manager. They're very professional. These little Rinpoches. He has a manager. They sort of gets taken care of. And he was on the other side of the river. He could see all these kind of pale-faced, strange, straw-haired people, Anglos. And he hadn't met any of these people before, but all his students now are this. So he had this strong wish, he said, to go over the rickety bridge, the little rope bridge, and talk to them. So anyway, he brought a bowl of potatoes. That's what Sherpas have, you know. So he walked over the bridge and he fell in the water. And he tells the story about how he was 8, okay? And he was, okay, who he was said to be was the reincarnation of a great meditator who lived up in the mountains, just up the road from where he was born, and for the last 30 years of his life, and then this little boy. And apparently when he was crawling, the moment his mother would turn his back, she'd always find him crawling up the path, going back up to the cave, you know. And by the time he could talk, she'd say, "Come home." He'd say, "No, that is my home." Anyway, whatever. But the point is, he's said to be this person. So he was 8 and he was drowning. And he said, the thought occurred to me. The person known as the Laudo Lama, that's who he's called, is about to die. And then he said, I didn't know anything about emptiness, this whole business of no self, meaning he hadn't learned it in that life. But he said, there was no fear. Now that's an indication of a person who's given up ego. So we think if he hasn't got instinct for survival, he will just sink to the bottom of the river like a stone and go, oh, okay, what the hell, I might as well die. No, he was rushing, his head would go up to the surface. He tried to, like this, looking like an ordinary little person trying to save himself. But his mind was clear. The person known as a Laudo Lama is about to die. But there was no fear. Meaning his mind was clear and rational and calm because there was no ego left. He'd cut ego grasping. So instinct for survival is just ego grasping. That's all. And like I said about all delusions, they are all based in fear. Fear is their voice. Anxiety, fear, panic. And Buddha Lama Zopa says, when you've realized emptiness, there is no fear. And that's another way of talking, the way Buddha talks about samsara. They talk about the fears of samsara. Samsara is just a word Buddha uses for being caught up in all these neuroses, that's all, which we take for granted, but which he says is mental illness and that we can get rid of it. So the thing with Lama Zopa then, we can say, he didn't in that life, he didn't learn about emptiness. He was 8. But it was imprinted in his mind from past habit. Why else would an 8-year-old not have fear when he was drowning? Why would that little boy, Dachen's son at the age of 3, have spontaneous, compassionate feelings for the lice in his own head? Why would Panos, this little thing, stand up when he sees a girl shape? Why would a boy get turned on by an animal shape? Imprints in the mind. Imprints in the mind. And at that level, they're deeply instinctive, beyond what we would think of as thoughts. But they're tightly packed, instinctive, but they can be broken down to and unpacked to be thoughts. So this root delusion, the main one, the ego grasping, is the most primordial of the delusions, the most deeply instinctively held. And it too can be unpacked and deconstructed for its lie to be exposed. And that's why you need single point of concentration. Because the conceptual mind is not sharp enough, is not clear enough, is not refined enough to do that work. You've got to go to a much, much subtler level of cognition to do this very subtle unpacking of the misconceptions, which are deeply instinctive in the bones of our being. but which we think are normal, we're all born this way, and we see them as self-existent. It's 11 o'clock. Time to stretch. All right, people? You all right, Keith? Processing? Processing? Go. I think good discussion. Let's think then. Maybe this one of thoughts, emotions, like I've talked just now. Maybe the emotions, how you can break them, how you can unpack them, and see how they're rooted in thoughts. Using the Brent example and my example, how anger is coming from thoughts. Anger is a story that happens to be, in my case, added to a lot of physical experience. That Panos's, experience of attachment is finally a story in his mind, but then which is so spontaneous, as he sees the body, it triggers it and turns his little body on, Would that be an interesting thing to discuss? Or do you want to discuss something else? Maybe it's up to your group. Choose what you want. Maybe it's good. But take one and really go into it. Maybe, Keith, if your group, you do this whole business that you're talking about. I don't know. See. Yes, Sharon. Yes. Can you say it again on the mic, darling?
You gave the example of someone who was drowning, and
yes.
My question was that can this not happen? Can an ordinary person, within inverted commas, not experience something very similar? Because I've had this experience myself. So, would it mean that I have no attachment to ego, or what?
It could mean that you have some familiarity with it. Yes. It could mean you have some familiarity with it. Yes, I've heard of many examples of people. Yes, it's true. So there could be some familiarity with it. There could be. Doesn't mean you've realized it absolutely. That's for you to know, But we can have some familiarity with it. You hear about people like in an accident, and all one person is doing at the time is thinking of the other person. That's compassionate. That's very powerful. So yes, there can be imprints or tendencies of this, absolutely. Doesn't mean you've fully realized it. Yep. Okay? Yes? A question, is it? Oh, okay. So, maybe can you... Okay, go on. Say it. Yep.
Does an unattached mind have cramps because we are doing now the stretching?
What? Are you being clever now, or are you being serious? What did you say? Does attached mind what?
Because we have to do our stretching,
yes.
And when you have thoughts in the mind, it comes down to a body level. So every cramp means like a thought. Yes or not?
No, I don't think. Why would that be?
Because when
just because you have a physical experience, no, it doesn't have to be. It just means you've got a crummy body that hasn't got flexible muscles. No, that doesn't necessarily follow. That just because you have a physical experience that it comes from a thought. No, it doesn't.
Okay, so there is no...
Doesn't necessarily follow all the time, But if you were to chop my hand off, I'd have a very strong physical feeling, but it's mainly the mental story that would interpret it. So, for example, if you're a great bodhisattva, there's a story one Lama said, for the great bodhisattvas, like these high beings who've gone beyond ego and have great compassion, he said for that person to cut his hand off and feed it to a starving animal is as inconsequential as a leaf falling off a tree. Because the way we grasp at our body now, the pain and all this, is completely attachment. Because if you have no attachment, you wouldn't have pain. It would not be a suffering experience for you. Yes, that would be the way. They look at Geshe Lama Kontrab in the mountains, Okay, goodbye. Thank you very much, everybody. Don't forget to think of your lunch in that way. Imagine it as oceans of nectar, and imagine just for a moment, if I could, I would offer to all beings in the universe. How marvelous. And then you happily eat.